So last week, Pastor Ross was teaching about abide, this word that we just don't use today in our normal everyday common language. Abide and abode aren't words that we pop out with. And he talked about really what abiding is an intimate relationship. It's about having a connection with God that is more than just a Facebook friend. It's about actually being connected with God in a relationship that is more intimate than maybe we recognize. And the week before that, Samuel, a youth on Youth Sunday, talked to us about reality, the world that we live in, and specifically for him, and I don't think he's alone in this, that he doesn't always have such an intimate relationship with God. That for him, hearing God, seeing God in his life isn't something that's so obvious and plain as it would seem to be for so many other people. And so we have this conundrum, because they're both right. This is experiences that we have in life. Some of us, and many of us even, maybe don't have this intimate relationship where we can just hear God. We can just know that God is with us, in our presence, speaking with us, guiding with us. And yet God tells us, I'm abiding with you. I am with you, speaking to you, wanting to have an intimate relationship that I guide. And so how do we solve this two? How do these two come together? How can we know God if we don't know God? How can we obey God's commandments if we don't know what He wants? If He can't talk to us, if we can't hear Him, how can we know what He wants? He abides with us, and we abide with Him. But if I can't hear Him, then I'm lost. So for the next 3 weeks, we're gonna get into a sermon series here about how we hear God. How is it that we hear God? Because we can hear God. We do hear God. We should know God's will. But how do you do that? Because if you have God's will, really, truly, nothing else in the world matters. I think this is actually the most important concept of Christianity. If you know God's will without a shadow of a doubt, what it is God wants for you in your life, then nothing else matters. And the proof to this are all of those saints who have come before us. All of those saints who gave their life. Even Paul says, he says, I consider everything I had before Jesus. And Paul uses a bad word that I shouldn't use in church, but he uses it. He says, everything I've had before Jesus, I consider, he says, rubbish. Okay, he used a different word, but he's right. And all of those saints who have come before, they gave their life. Why does anybody give their life? And they wanted to. It was a good thing for them to give their life. And why? Because they understood what God wanted, who He was, what His will is. And they understood it so perfectly that everything else, up to and including their life, fell in line with His will. And once we understand that, we find ourselves in this place that even death can't harm us. And that's kind of the whole point. Even death has lost its sting. So how can I know God's will? What's God's will? Well, let me start with what's not God's will. God's will is not a feeling. Feeling is a component of how we understand to get God's will, but it's not a feeling. God's will is not just some great feeling that you have. It would be like saying that you're sick, and then they call that the fever that you get the sickness. Well, the fever isn't the sickness, right? The sickness is a bacterial infection or a viral infection. Maybe you met a pretty girl or a cute boy, and all of a sudden, you're hot. Or maybe you're just a Midwesterner who moved to Florida. So you're hot. That doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you, although I do wonder why so many Midwesterners move to Florida. There's got to be something wrong with us. But the fever is not the problem, you see. The fever is the symptom of what's going on. Well, the same way with feelings. Feelings are not the Lord. It's not God's will. Feelings are unreliable. There can be external stimulus that change how our feelings work. There can be internal stimulus that change how our feelings work. And remember, just because you feel it doesn't make it true. Just because you have a feeling about something doesn't mean all of a sudden that is the only truth that there is. In fact, only following your feelings is going to get you in trouble. If everything you ever did was just because you felt like it, you'd never do anything. You wouldn't get out of bed. You wouldn't work hard. You wouldn't go to school. Who would want to do schoolwork? All of us would flunk out. Please, I would not be bothering with school. We wouldn't work out and exercise and eat right and do all those things we're supposed to do or whatever else. Because why? Because we don't feel like it. Feelings change with the wind. They can change with what you eat or maybe not eat. Has anybody ever been hangry before? Do you know this word hangry? It's like a combination of hungry. And because you're hungry, what? You're angry. So what are you? You're hangry. Right? Right? Well then, if your feelings are so flimmy-flammy as to be stymied by a candy bar or not, then maybe you shouldn't count on them. Or fatigue, if you haven't slept enough, you know that you can be tired or grumpy, especially if you just wake up. I know many of us are that way. Hormones. Many of us were teenagers at one point in time. Not all of us. Some of us were born in our 50s. But many of us have had understanding of what hormones are, or maybe what you read, or what you saw, or maybe something somebody said to you at that exact moment set you off or put you in a good mood, or who knows. All of a sudden, your feelings, they can come, they can go. Has anybody ever made a decision in your life based on a feeling, and then that turned out to be the wrong decision? We have all been there, I imagine, or many of us have been there. And why? Why? Because feelings are not the things that we should base our life upon. They can enrich life. They're great, fine, sure, but that's not where you do all of your planning. And that's how God works. Feelings are fine. They have their place, but that's not where God is going to build your salvation, on your feelings. What isn't knowing God's will? Well, God's will isn't a formula. God's will isn't a recipe. I remember coming across a book 13 years ago. I came across this book called The Prayer of Shabazz. Maybe some of you have seen this or heard about it. It was pretty popular when it came out, and the idea was there's this like really small minor figure in the Bible named Shabazz, and he prayed in just such a way, and God gave him what he prayed for. And the whole concept of the book was if you pray like this guy Shabazz, then God will give you whatever you're praying for. If you follow these steps, God will be your lapdog. He'll be your genie to do what you want. Well, that's not how God is. That's not how God works. First of all, if you do it that way, you're saying that you know better than God. Okay, well, maybe I'm pretty sure that's not the case. The second thing is, what if some Gators fan prays that they beat Georgia? What if there's another Georgia fan praying that they beat the Gators? Well, what's God supposed to do? You know, they both did the prayer of Shabazz. Oh no, now God doesn't know what to do. Which gets at the real issue of the matter, which is that when you think that God is a formula to be followed, you're removing God from the equation. And now you're worshiping a formula. You don't want a formula, you want God in your life. You don't want your will, to be honest. You want God's will in your life. And this idea that we can follow a formula, it fits really well with our modern concept that we should have everything, right? I should have a microwave to put whatever meal I want in and have it out warm, hot in 30 seconds. When I watch a sitcom, it's going to resolve itself in 30 minutes with commercials. I'm going to watch a movie, and in the end, the X-Men or whatever is going to be all resolved. The girl's going to be with the guy. The bad guy's going to get caught. It's all going to be fine and good, and it's going to be an hour and a half long. 17 steps to whatever you want will never work. It just doesn't work that way. God isn't a formula. In fact, if He were, could you imagine if you left out a step? Right, these are the 17 steps that you have to do, but you forgot step 15. In a recipe, when you're making a cake, if you forget the baking soda, you don't have a cake, you have pita bread. Could you imagine if you did the same thing with God? You're trying to get whatever you want out of God, and you're following all the formulas so that you can have what you want, and all of a sudden you forgot that one step, and then what happens? Oh man, your brother disappears from the planet. Oh, what? Oh my goodness, I forgot step 12. It's a good thing that God isn't a formula. Maybe you've fallen into this trap where you try and figure out what God's will is, and you say, well, is it A or is it B? What does God want me to do? Does He want me to do this, or does He want me to do this? And that's what we call a false dichotomy. It's not one or the other. Most likely, for God anyway, it could be A, B, C, D, all the way down to Z. God has all of the scenarios. He is infinite. He sees things that we don't even see. We're trying to contemplate A and B, and God's saying, yo, it's D. Get with G. Did you even know that H existed? See, the thing is, we get lost in this thing. What is God's will? What do we want to do? Is it here to... Don't worry about, is it A or is it B? Worry about where God is in whatever choice that you make. That's the decision. That's the real thing. It's not, does God want me to adopt a cat or God wants me to adopt a dog? God doesn't care whether you adopt a cat or a dog. Adopt them both, for crying out loud. It's how you adopt the animal. Is God in there? Where is God in those decisions that you're making? That's the most important thing to worry about. Are your decisions focused on God, or are they focused on you? That's the thing to worry about. Not, does God want me to have a car or drive a motorcycle? That's not important. The answer is a motorcycle. So God is not a feeling. God is not a formula. God is a relationship. Jesus said in the Gospel of John 15:15, he said, I have called you friend. This should blow our minds that God is our friend. It just kind of goes through our minds, though. We didn't even catch it, I bet. Oh, okay, I have friends with God. I got lots of friends. Have you seen my Facebook page? No. See, the thing is about being a friend with God is He doesn't command anymore. The commandments aren't the same as we think they are when we hear command. So when I first married my wife, I had been living on my own for the better part of a decade. I moved out right when I was 18, married my wife somewhere around 27. We got married, we move in together. I'm going to leave, I go out, I go, hey, bye, Ashley, and I leave, and I come back, and then Ashley sits me down. Husbands, you know the sit down. And she says, look, you can't just say goodbye and leave. That's not how our relationship works. You have to give me a kiss. You have to say goodbye and give me a kiss. That's what you have to do. And I was so thankful for that she would tell me how it is that our relationship should work. Now, you can call that a command, but that's not the idea. It's not like she said, you have to give me some makeout session before you can go. That's not what she wanted. She didn't want me to check a box. Okay, I gave you a kiss, bye. What she wanted was for me to recognize the relationship that we have, which is not roommates. It's husband and wife. That's a very different relationship. And the command that she gave me, you have to give me a kiss, wasn't a command from on high. It was a revelation about how our relationship works. And if I do that, if I give her kisses when I leave, then you know what? Our relationship works better. All of a sudden, the command that my wife gave me wasn't something that I had to do because it was, I'm a slave to her. It was something I wanted to do because it made my relationship with her that much better. This is what Jesus is saying. He said, look, I'm your friend. We're friends. You're not a slave. He literally said that. You're not a slave anymore. I'm not giving you commands so that you follow them. He did that. God did that. That's like the whole of the Old Testament. 613 laws. Boom! Follow these. Just do them. Stop thinking and do them. You know what happened? Some people did them. Some people did them better than others. And then everybody who was doing them looked at everybody else and said, well, I'm doing them better than you. And then they started saying, well, who was better and who was what? And I know who's better. You put bacon on everything. I am better than you. Jesus does not love bacon. But Jesus does love bacon. That's why Jesus came, so that we could eat bacon. Do you realize that Jesus came so we could eat bacon? I think that's one of the underrated things of the New Testament. Jesus came so that we would stop following the laws. Because as soon as we have just the laws, how quickly are we going to loophole that stuff? Which is what we did. Jesus came not so that we would follow the laws, but so that we would follow the Lord. He came so that we might have more than just the lines. He came so that we could be the love. Now, I tell you, being the love is harder than having the lines. If you have 613 things that you have to follow, that might seem really, really hard. But in the end, you only have 613 things you have to follow. Loving is easier than following the 13 things because you can do them. You can't actually follow all 613. You can do love, though. But the reason love is harder is because it's never done. There's always more love to do. In fact, there's so much love, it could never be done. It will never be finished. That's why we teach. That's why we make disciples. Because when we're dead, somebody needs to do that. When you're in a relationship with God, then you have to think about what God wants. You have to know who He is. This is the beautiful thing about being in a relationship, is that if you have an intimate relationship, if you abide with God and God abides with you, then you know what God wants. Just like if you have a relationship with anybody else, your spouse or whatever, you know what they want. Now, I know what my wife is going to think. Next service, she's going to sit right there, right where Judy sits, yeah, and she's going to think, just like what Judy said, keep me out of your sermon. That'll be the first thing she thinks. The second thing she thinks is, why are you still talking about me? The third thing she thinks is, we're going to have a nice sit down. We're going to talk about this later. And that's fine. That's fine. You know what? I'm going to tell her the same thing I'm going to tell you, which is if you have a relationship with me, you just better get used to it. I am just painfully honest. I bring it out. And if you know me, if you hung out with me long enough, I'll probably zing you. I will make fun of you. And the goal here is you had better make fun of me back. Gentlemen, get with me. This is how you know who your friends are. I try to explain this to my wife. No, when I say to my friends that they're a loudmouth or a Bigfoot or Rambo, there's always a Rambo. Guys, you ever notice that? There's always a Rambo in every group. There's always some guy who's more into guns than the other guys. Yeah, and if you don't know who the Rambo is, you're the Rambo in your group. When I say these things, when I call my friends loudmouth, what I'm saying is, I love you. And when they come back to me with whatever else they come back to me, I hear, I love you. Because that's how we work. When you're close enough with somebody that you know that when you push them this way, they're going to push back on this way, that is an intimate relationship. This is what God is talking about, that when you're in an intimate relationship, then you know the give and the take. You don't have to worry about what the laws are anymore. You just have to worry about what love is. And if whatever decision you make in life is done with God and with love, it will work out. I promise you. And I've seen it. And if you've been there, if you've seen the mountains move because of God's love, it's addicting. It makes you want to do it more and more. It's how I got where I am right now. It's where I'm going. It's the reason you follow me, because I'm a nut, and I'm going to go crazy for Jesus, and you go, well, at least somebody will. I guess we'll follow him. You say, great, all right. So how do we know what God's will is? Because it's not enough to follow some crazy nut. You need to know in your life in all the different places. So the first thing is to be in a relationship. And the thing about God, the command that he gave, now, he boiled it down. He boiled all 613 down to 2, but he kept giving 1 over and over and over and over and over and over and over, just relentlessly. Jesus said over and over the one same commandment. He said, love somebody else. Love someone else. Love your enemies. Love your neighbor. Love the guy next door. Love the one you work with. Sacrifice some time. Inconvenience your life. Or don't. Maybe it's easy for you to love. But just love. And in the act of loving, we receive more than just a glimpse of who God is. We receive God himself.